Hey, what's up, Cape Bros? So in today's video, I'm going to be comparing the new dynamic gauges with the original advanced gauges, because as most of you guys probably know, in the new Greenville update, they did end up adding some new dynamic gauges into the game, which look quite interesting, but there has been a bit of a debate going on in the community recently whether the advanced gauges were actually better than the new dynamic gauges are. And both of these gauges are quite different to each other, so I feel like it's going to be pretty interesting to see them compete against each other. But anyways, let's get straight into it. So first of all, here, starting off with the advanced gauges, these gauges have been here since the revamp initially launched, and these gauges have to be a lot of people's personal favorite gauges even after the dynamic gauges came out, pretty much just because of how much more overall detailed they are. So as you guys can see, you have your fuel gauge, you have your speedometer, and then you can also see your RPMs on this gauge as well. And it's overall just a pretty nice and clean looking gauge with everything you need to know right here, and it's also a lot more in depth with detail as well compared to the dynamic gauges, as you have the individual numbers here, which the dynamic gauges sadly do not have. So overall, there's not much to say about the advanced gauges apart from the fact that if you want to see a lot more information on your car and how it is, then I would much rather choose the advanced gauges over the dynamic gauges, as they just give you that more wide range of information. So moving on to the dynamic gauges here, you guys can clearly see that this looks a lot different than the advanced gauges that I was just showcasing before. So we still have our speedometer and fuel gauge right here, and we can still see our RPMs and whatnot. So there is still a considerable amount of information here, and basically the exact same amount of information as the advanced gauges, but the reason why people may not want to use this is because of the fact that they are a lot less detailed. So as you guys can see, there are no numbers and like pinpoints actually showing exactly where everything is. Instead, you sort of just have to estimate it in your head almost with these lines that go up, which I guess isn't necessarily a bad thing, but once again, if you do want like a fully accurate representation of where your car is at in certain aspect, then the advanced gauges will definitely give you a more accurate representation of that. As with the dynamic gauges, they sort of went with a more modernistic sort of view on things, which in return has made them actually remove some of these minor details, which some people may actually want. So just basing off that information in your head, you may just go ahead and instantly assume that the advanced gauges are the best option possible, which yes, technically they would be just basing off that information. However, with the new dynamic gauges, there are a lot of other things that could convince you to switch to these instead. So not only do we have a more advanced design, but also in the middle of the gauges, you actually have a little car display here which showcases a lot of different information. So for example, if I intentionally try to pop one of my tires here, then you guys will actually see on the gauge cluster that it actually does display on the car model right here. So as you guys can see, it did turn red for a bit there when I hit my tire, and I didn't even actually pop it. It just shows you when you sort of hit something at a faster rate. So yeah, as you guys can see, when you're like bumping over curbs and stuff, your gauges do actually turn sort of yellow or red depending on how severe it actually was. So you guys can clearly see that right there. And also, if you're in a public server and somebody is driving up next to you, you can actually also see it on the little display in the middle, sort of acting like a blind spot type thing. And the way how the entire thing actually works is super advanced, if I'm going to be completely honest, and in my opinion it is definitely a lot more detailed than what we have on the advanced gauges. And then also we have a couple other things here. So if we press this down arrow right here, it actually minimizes the gauges, which is super nice in my opinion, because in the past, if we wanted to do that sort of thing, we actually had to switch to the standard gauges, which were a lot less detailed, and also had to go to the side of your screen like that, and they didn't really look that good in my opinion. But these just look a lot more sleek, and since you don't have to hop out of your car every single time to change it back, and you can just click this arrow, I definitely think that's an upside. And then also there's a couple different viewing options on these gauges. So if you click this sort of full screen button right here, then as you guys can see, the gauges sort of adjust, and in my opinion, this option is the best one to has the most detail, but if for some reason you like to keep it as minimalistic as possible, then you guys can adjust with this. And then guys, another cool thing with the dynamic gauges is that there is actually a little button down here which is exclusive to the dynamic gauges, where on some cars with turbos in them, if you actually click this little lightning bolt, it will actually switch to display your turbo pressure instead. And then if you press it again, apparently that just shows like how much power your car is actually using. And once again, this is actually exclusive to the dynamic gauges, so it's honestly a very cool feature. And even though it doesn't give you the exact amount of turbo pressure that you're using, it is still better than not seeing it at all. And believe it or not, that's not even it when it comes to the dynamic gauges, because on top of the crazy amount of features I've already shown you guys, there are actually some more features as well that I'm going to show you guys here. So as you guys can see, there are actually two arrows to the side here, and they both do the same thing, and they just kind of move in opposite directions, so it doesn't really matter what one you press. But I'm just going to press this one right here, and if you guys pay attention to the middle of the gauge cluster, you guys will see that the car will actually drive away, and then it will display the navigation map. So this is the exact same navigation map that we actually have on GVOS. So if you guys have a look on GVOS and we go to the navigation map, it is literally the exact same map and it functions the exact same. Only difference is that on the gauges you can't actually search up locations where you want to go to, sadly. And also if you display a location with a waypoint on GVOS, it doesn't show up in your gauges for whatever reason. But nevertheless, it still looks sick and it actually can be super useful, especially for newer players. And then guys, if you press the arrow once again, then you will actually get a little compass that also displays the time. And I don't really see how this is entirely useful, since you can literally see the compass and the time up on the top of your screen right here anyways, but I guess it's still kind of a little cool addition. But this isn't really something that like is exclusive to the dynamic gauges, since even if you switch to the advanced gauges, you can still see the exact same thing up here. But yes, that's basically it. So when it comes to what type of gauge you should actually choose, it really all comes down to personal preference. As for the people who want to see the more advanced, minute details on their vehicle, then I would definitely choose the advanced gauges. But for those of you guys who want to have that more minimalistic, modernistic type gauge cluster, then I would definitely choose the dynamic gauges instead, especially with the crazy amount of features that come with this thing. But tell me what you guys think about it in the comments below. Personally, I do like the dynamic gauge cluster a bit better, but I feel like they both go pretty well against each other. But anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. See you later, and goodbye.